once again, thanks for tuning in, people. I am in the virtual California theater with the creative team behind A Hard Problem, which I'm going to unabashedly say so far is my favorite film of the Cinequest Festival. And if you guys, I'm here with John Bertchtold and the writing directing duo known as Hazart. This is the California Theater, which is in a normal time. This is where I would be seeing your movie tomorrow night, and unfortunately, So, it's it's a very moving film, and so I'm gonna turn it to Hazard first. Tell me about the genesis of this, because it's an interesting approach to one of man's eternal questions.
Yeah, I think we wanted to sort of ask a big question in a small way. I think, we knew we, for sort of budgetary reasons, had to write a story that was manageable. We knew we wanted to produce this independently. And we've been listening to a lot of sort of philosophy and sort of tech concern over AI and sort of what it means to be conscious. So we wanted to write a small story about what it means to be a person, and that's where this came from.
The sort of original log line in our heads that got us on this path was, what would it be like, or could you convince a robot of an afterlife in order to like sort of accept being turned off or dying, essentially, right? So it was sort of maybe a bit more transgressive and like, ooh, this is sort of edgy, but like it quickly got sort of restructured into this family drama surrounding the death of a mother. And so that's still a very like thin thread of the movie that exists, but it sort of started off with this like very narrow question that then sort of broadened out into this sort of exploration of consciousness and technology and those.
I mean, I think it's easy to sort of see how, we have plenty of current technology that no one has really thought about the ethics behind. They just sort of, the sort of Facebook slogan of move fast and break things seems to be like everybody's motto when developing new technology. And we just wanted to sort of slow down and say like, well, okay, if this technology is so eminent and we, in the AI space, the sort of brightest minds think we will get there at some point. What the timeline is, I think, is pretty unclear. But we should be having the ethical questions asked and answered by much smarter people than us. But we wanted to try to ask the questions because it seems a little concerning. If your Roomba was conscious, like what are the ethics behind like unplugging it? I think
I just know it would be judging me constantly.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
It's like found more crumbs on your floor, Derek.
Exactly. So I mean, and it is it's the job of the artist to ask these questions, but I did realize in the last year a company in Japan is working on creating or has created the AI children that have passed away. So you can go into VR and confront basically the ghost of your child or your parent. When you were shooting this, like the world started catching up to your question. So
yeah, I mean, grief is a thing that we all sort of, it's all of us will go through it, right, in one way or another, and we don't much like to talk about it, and the only sort of framework people tend to talk about it in is a religious one, which may not be useful for everyone. And so, technology can do a lot to like ease pain and maybe give closure in some way. We should just make conscious, sorry, no pun intended, decisions as to what that is and how we do that. And yeah, I mean, I hadn't heard that story, but it seems, it's sort of it's sort of like a phantom limb, people who have phantom limbs that like feel like a hand is clutching, they use like a mirror to try to get them to realize they can open their hand and relax, and then that pain goes away. I think what you're describing sort of feels like a sort of phantom limb for grief. And I think a product like Ian, like a parallel, could be incredibly useful for lonely people who have lost loved ones. It's just, we should figure out the ethics around.
Well, but at the same time, like, there's probably arguments the other side that like grief is necessary, and like that there's a level of unhealthiness to like sort of living that fantasy. Sure. And yeah, so to us, it didn't seem obvious that it was gonna exist. It just seemed like this seems like it would be a place that technology would come in to try to fill a problem that can't really be solved, philosophically, and try to do it technologically.
And then what to do with AI consciousness. It's interesting you brought up saying that, you started the log line or the pitch is saying that it's how do you convince an AI that there's a heaven so it will shut itself off. And yet very clearly, Ian, at the beginning of the film, establishes that his mother did not believe in it at all.
Right.
So that's a interesting dichotomy. So let me turn it a little bit to John, who had to chart this path on screen. First, I guess my question is really, was this shot chronologically to help with that arc, or were you jumping around in Ian's development?
It started off very much, what you see at the beginning of the film is a lot of what we filmed at the start. So I was able to have a diving board in terms of, where Ian's arc begins. And so a lot of that grief and that sadness and loneliness, I was able to take that and use it to apply everything that we filmed later on, which sort of, a lot of it was chronological, but we jumped around. So it was really nice to have that first week of me, packing up my mom's house, going through those grief processes alone. And then once the rest of the cast arrived and we got to explore those bigger questions, and Ian reveals or finds out who he is, it was a lot easier to dive into those because I sort of already started at a place where Ian starts.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny's being, we did shoot the beginning sort of with all the small stuff with John, mostly as a way to get the crew acclimated, sort of logistically. But John's an incredibly brilliant actor in that, like, we could drop him from scene to scene and be able to adjust back and forth. And the same with Catherine. They're just practical. They're like practicalities of shooting an indie movie where you don't get to be Inarritu traveling the world in chronological order to shoot The Revenant. Like, we had to do things for scheduling purposes, and also just, we wanted to make sure the crew wasn't being asked to move back and forth within the house. So, you don't want to like abuse the crew and make them rig and de-rig and move from place to place. It just becomes not practical. So working with actors like John and Catherine, where you can be like, okay, where were we before this scene? Where are we supposed to be after this scene? And like lock into that. They were both incredibly good at doing that.
Well, thank you. We were your puppets, and we said.
It's true though, yeah. Screams and all.
And I do think, you did an economical job of world building as well, even though the world is very small. And I'm glad you brought up Catherine and her character Olivia, who has a couple of really interesting side sequences, and you do have the hint of something else going on with the AI or the AIs, I should say, before you focus on John. I mean, how tempting and was it to explore that part further, and how did you rein yourselves back in?
Yeah, we wanted to give it, as much sort of blue sky and showing a broader world as we could manage, both like schedule and budget wise. So I'm glad it felt like there was a bigger world, and we certainly wanted to hint at it. We just weren't necessarily gonna follow it as far as a plot. It wasn't gonna delve into some like, conspiracy within Qualia or something and turn into some sort of,
That's the sequel.
I mean,
That's the sequel.
as tempting as that may have been, yeah, like budgetarily, we couldn't afford it, and we didn't want to focus on that. So yeah, it was just to once we sort of started that pivot point when we first show Olivia as, yeah, we really want to sort of push the audience further into like, well, wait, where are we and what is going on? Because everything for the most part looks fairly contemporary, but there are hints when you see it, with the like sort of autonomous vehicle that pulls up outside the hospital, and if you notice the light switches or not. And again, that spoke more to our aesthetic that we liked, that also the budget afforded, which was that, the future doesn't come all at once. It gets sort of sprinkled throughout. And so it's not all going to be shiny and new. And we didn't honestly want to tip the audience that they were watching sci-fi. We liked the idea that they would feel like this is more a family drama, and then it sort of unfolds.
Yeah,
I feel like we've just blown that in this interview, but yes, okay.
yeah. Spoilers. But yeah, I think building the world the future is, you need really creative and like nimble collaborators between from the on-set world of our production designer Curtis Moore and costume designer Melissa Karsh, of figuring out how to make things feel just a little bit different, because if we had set this too far in the future with like teleportation devices and spaceships, I think it sort of gives the audience permission to say, well, this isn't our problem, this is their problem, and that's so far away, that can is so far down the road. Whereas the house looks like a house. Sure, the light switches don't really match, but I think that sort of asks the current audience who recognizes this world at least somewhat to say, this is something we need to consider. And then in post-production, Martin Hall, our visual effects supervisor, brought together an incredible team of VFX artists to give us everything from a, cooperative owl to light switches to, drop team boxes and all the just little things. You've got to spend the money wisely in small ways to make sure that like it's the stuff at the edge of the frame, right? Like that makes you believe that the world is real. When it's giant wide shots of tons of CG, that's just like an expression of money. But like when it's just on the edges in the factory sequence, when it's just the edges of that frame as we come up and you don't see much, like we sort of feel like that sells it more.
Yeah. And John, I think the most important question I have for you is how good are you at backgammon?
Oh, yes. Did you not watch? I'm a pro. I'm in all the competitions now. No, I had played prior to this film, and so I had the honor and privilege of learning from Kyle and Matt. Have I played since? I'm gonna say yes. Good? No. Basically, a lot of times they'd be like, okay, just put it here for the shot. And I'm like, okay, but we did learn and we did play. So
yeah. Once again, it's like you're their puppets. So what was, but really, it's a growing thing to have collective. So all three of you can talk about this. The decision to be a creative team that is Hazard, even though yes, you have real names and I haven't used them, but John has, Kyle and Matt. But you're Hazard, and then John, you're being directed by two people. What's that experience?
Oh, absolutely awful. No, it was because it wasn't just this one-on-one conversation. It was a collaborative discussion that was always happening. And I mean, Hazard, they are this entity that is very thoughtful. They know precisely what they're going for, but they're not going to tell you no if you want to play. And that's something that Catherine and Jen and Victoria and I, all of us, were so happy to have that room to find the characters within ourselves and on set, even though they had this beautifully detailed idea of what the characters were. And You know, it was just also a funny dynamic, you know, like we'd do a scene and then Matt would lean over and whisper something into Kyle's ear and like, I'd be like, okay, actually, so let's do this. And it was just a wonderful, you know, fun experience. And obviously they create magic together. So they're not allowed to part ways ever.
Okay. You don't want to,
I'm
right?
not in the dust either. I'm with you forever now too.
Yeah. John's just been added. No, I think, you know, we often say like filmmaking is a collaborative effort. Our collaboration as writers and directors starts one step before a single director. And the use of a moniker is just to sort of present in a very clear way that this is a single vision from two people. If we were to use two names, there's always one name that will come before the other. And so there's always that dynamic. And
we recognize the temptation, and it's happened since we started doing this back in college, is people are very curious of like, well, who does what? How do you, sort of spread or divide the sort of work? And the truth is that there isn't really a division, and that we didn't go to school. We didn't each land at university saying like, I got to find my directing partner, right? Like we were both had the idea that we wanted to do our own thing. It just sort of happened that we started writing something together, and then since we both wanted to direct, we were like, well, neither of us wants to hand it over completely, so let's try directing together. And it just happened that our sensibilities work. And it's just directing is just sort of filtering other aesthetics, opinions, and talents, right? You're just trying to focus it. You're the last sort of portal that it travels through, and you're trying to like be the prism that focuses everything. So it's just sort of one more layer to us. It's like a finer mesh. It's another set of eyes that gets to like scrutinize.
It's like double straining a cocktail. You have the strainer and the thing, and
exactly.
that's just
Okay, excellent. Well, it works. And thank you all for joining me today to talk about this film. It's a hard place. It makes its world premiere at Cinequest starting March 20th, running through March 30th. People, you can buy tickets at cinequest.org. It's only $3.99 for the rights to stream. Half of the money goes to the filmmakers. And this movie should be seen. And when it happens in August, and when Cinequest hopefully happens in person in August, I hope to see you all there and to share the experience of watching this film with other people, because that really, really needs to happen. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out on any Fanboy Planet videos. And remember, use your powers for good.